It's considered one of the tightest presidential elections in American history, with issues like inflation, reproductive rights, and immigration dividing this nation. There is one demographic that could determine our future: the behemoth Latino vote.
The Latino vote is important because of the massive size of the Latino electorate. There are more Latinos eligible to vote than African Americans.
36.2 million Latinos in the U.S. are eligible to vote. 17 million of them are expected to cast a ballot nationwide.
One of the biggest areas of growth for Latino voters is among those who are third generation in the United States.
What are the campaigns doing to capture the Hispanic voter?
We're the future workers, we're the future leaders, we're the future of the United States.
How do you reach these voters that are so often misrepresented and misunderstood? We answer these questions and more on Decision 2024 Latino Voters. Welcome to Decision 2024 Latino Voters. I'm Giselle Fernandez, joining you from La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. This is a center that celebrates Latino cultures through art in downtown Los Angeles. This year, Latinos generated an economic output of $3.7 trillion with a T. That makes U.S. Latinos the fifth largest economy in the world. If they hold the purse strings and the power, and if they turn out and can decide who is the next president of the United States, who controls the House of Representatives, then why are they not turning out in larger numbers? And where are political parties failing them? Lydia Pantazis kicks us off by showing us how one organization is connecting with voters through culture, an area where many candidates fail.
Making her voice heard on Election Day, UCLA student Yvette Mendez feels a deep responsibility as a proud Latina to not only speak out for herself, but her community.
Definitely there are a multitude of issues relating to education, abortion rights. We also have issues relating to immigration status. So every election grows increasingly more important.
And she says because this is a presidential election, the stakes are higher. It's the reason her sorority, Lambda Theta Alpha Latin Sorority Incorporated, is screening a new telenovela aimed at inspiring young Latino voters. The 6-episode mini telenovela follows Alexia, a young Latina who finds her voice and in the end aims to inspire people to vote.
I think people resonate with it just because it may kind of tie them closer to wherever they're from, so like their home country, and just having that representation. It's something that we don't often see, especially on social media all the time.
Mi amor, con un poquito de cafecito.
It was released by Poder NC Action, a nonprofit organization in North Carolina, committed to uplifting the Latino community. Irene Godinez is the founder and co-executive director of Poder NC Action, who created the mini telenovela.
If we envision and can imagine a different reality and can put an image to it to show people what it's like to go from not feeling confident about your voice to owning your voice and the power that you have, that then we would be able, just like with all art, be able to see it replicated in real life.
So what do you think about this upcoming election?
Godinez says the goal of the telenovela is to tap into culture to inspire Latinos to vote, using the art of the telenovela, something she says many Latinos grew up watching.
Where you see it and you know it's for you because it was made for and by us.
Experts say Latinos are more likely to be in other groups that also see low voter turnout, for example, younger voters and lower income voters. Mindy Romero is the founder and director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy at USC.
It can be what I call a compounding effect, right? Where an individual Latino can actually be a part of multiple groups that predict low turnout. They could still turn out, but they just have more barriers, right? And they need that outreach and voter mobilization.
Mendez is hoping her efforts help inspire fellow Latino voters.
Just seeing someone maybe take action or initiative could also inspire someone who maybe looks the same as you to also do the same.
Something she hopes has a ripple effect this election, getting as many people to the polls as possible.
And here to discuss this more is the CEO of NALEO, which is the National Association of Elected and Appointed Latino Officials, Arturo Vargas, and also Professor of Political Science and Public Policy at USC, Christian Gross. Bienvenido. Thank you for being here on such an important subject. Let's start here. This election, 36.2 million Latinos are registered to vote, eligible. The polls say less than half, 17 million, will actually cast their ballot because maybe we don't have as culturally relevant, outreach by either party. Why is that?
Well, first of all, what we're talking about is 36 million Latino adult U.S. citizens. Of those, about 19 to 20 million are registered to vote. And of those, at least 17.5 million will vote. So if we can get Latinos registered to vote, their likelihood of voting is very high, almost on par with non-Latinos. Not quite, but they approach non-Latino voter turnout. So our challenge really is getting Latinos registered to vote.
But the polls show, including some of your research, that Latinos don't feel that either party, the Republicans or the Democrats, actually outreach them in the culturally relevant ways we've just seen. And if this is such a behemoth voting bloc that could decide who the next president is and who controls the House, why don't the parties actually have more culturally relevant access so they have more civic engagement?
We recently did a poll of many congressional districts where Latinos are significant or majority populations, and we found that turnout differed quite a bit depending on where Latino voters resided. So if you go to the Central Valley of California, for example, Latino mobilization is much lower, Latino registration is much lower. There's a lot of different demographic reasons that is the case. But if you go to places like suburban LA County, suburban Orange County, Riverside County, the mobilization is actually fairly high. Latino voters participated at a lot higher rates in those places, and so I think we have to break down Latino voters by region, urban, suburban, and rural to really understand this mobilization issue.
I understand from your polling from Naleo, Arturo, that many Latinos don't understand how the process works. Civic engagement education is so low. How do we change that? How do the parties change that?
Well, keep in mind that, yes, we're a huge voting bloc, but we're also a very new voting bloc. We have hundreds and hundreds of Latinos entering the electorate every single day because they turn 18 years of age. So it's a young electorate. It's an electorate that's looking for information. And one of the things we've learned is that if the information is not available, oftentimes people will say, well, I don't know how to fill out my ballot, so I'm not going to risk it and make a wrong decision, so I'm not going to vote. Which is why we at Naleo are so committed to making sure we can make available accurate and true information about how to register to vote, how to get a mail-in ballot, how to cast that ballot.
And one of the best ways to reach Latinos is on digital devices. They over-index on everything from Facebook to YouTube channels.
Which means they're also susceptible to mis and disinformation because it is very, very popular among social media, especially Spanish social media, the amount of dis and misinformation targeting Latinos.
When we come back, the top concerns for Latino voters and how immigration has become a much more complex issue when casting their votes. A recent Pew Research Center survey cites the economy as being the issue of most importance to Latino voters in this year's presidential election, followed by healthcare, violent crime, gun policy, and then immigration. Jacqueline Hurtado takes us to a predominantly Mexican neighborhood to find out what's top of mind for Latinos, which overlaps with the rest of the electorate.
Later. Thanks for coming.
Inside El Sereno Greengrocer, Erica Crenshaw cheerfully greets each customer walking through this historic building.
The little kids come roll up and know my name. They look for me.
Eric and her partner Patricia Torres are the owners, and they opened up the grocery store last year, offering organic produce with a side of social responsibility.
We're a little bit of a mix of a farmer's market, a convenience store, a grocery store, that is really trying to be accountable and in community with the people here.
But we can keep it like right
It's here in their store where they say they hear the concerns of the Latino community that surrounds them.
It's everything from inflation, like things are just super expensive. It's also the general morale in the United States. Like there's a lot of global politics and local politics that are just getting people exhausted and tired and sad.
Patricia points to the presidential election leading to the uncertainty for many Latinos.
There's just sort of a gloomy, uncertain feeling around what is going to happen in the political climate.
Erica says the things other voters worry about are the same things Latinos worry about too.
Healthcare, housing, education, food.
They believe their shop represents more than just a store. It embodies the political issues that matter the most to Americans like them.
And actually, this shop is our attempt to speak to all of those issues, everything from the economy to the climate.
Matt Barreto's an expert in polling. He says Latino concerns align closely with those of other voters.
Latinos are focused on costs right now. They're looking at cost of living, cost of housing, cost of health care, just to name a few.
Barreto says immigration, historically a top issue for Latino voters, has taken a backseat in this election cycle.
It's just dropped in salience as a top issue, I think, because this election has primarily been talking about costs, and then after that talking about abortion rights. These are the issues that are the headline issues today. And so I think it's a mistake, actually, to assume that Latinos don't care about immigration and immigration reform. They still do.
Hi, welcome. Hi.
For now, they hope by the end of the year their sales will stabilize, and their mission to prove that a community space can also be a catalyst for conversation and change.
This is what it's about. It's community building. That's what I'm talking about. I want to do this.
Yeah, it does.
And as they work to overcome these challenges, Erika and Patricia believe that change starts in the community.
Bye.
Bye, Tom. Thanks for coming.
See you.
And here to discuss this more and why both campaigns from both parties don't dive in more to this key issue is Christian Gross from USC, political science professor, and from UCLA, professor of political science and public policy, Efren Perez. Thank you for being here. So if the main issue is the economy, why don't they focus more on the economy with Latino voters?
Latino voters, more than non-Latino voters, think the economy is worse right now if you ask where things compared to where they were a year ago. So that is the issue that's driving a lot of the undecided Latino voters in particular. Why aren't the parties doing more? I think part of it is Harris is sort of stuck with Biden, for good or for bad for her, and a lot of voters who think the economy is worse are blaming the Biden and Harris administration.
Another issue that's dividing the Latino vote is immigration. On the one hand, the right wants to crack down hard on the border. You have Kamala Harris going further to the right than most Democrats ever have on cracking down on the border, but also trying to protect immigrants and the undocumented, just as Biden has. How do those two strategies resonate with the Latino voter?
So the further you are from that immigrant experience, the sort of the bonds that tie you to your larger ethnic group tend to loosen a little bit. You tend to be a little bit more receptive to alternative interpretations, right? And so this is why it's been relatively straightforward for the Trump campaign in particular to have this message about America first, and wink, wink, you get to be part of America. You get to be on the seat over here, but you're still not like them. On the left, with Democrats, I think even foreign-born and second-generation Latinos would like a more streamlined system that was predictable when it comes to immigration.
Comprehensive immigration reform.
Yes, predictable, certainty. And if you can revise that and still say, and I want to be sure that we're not letting in the wrong kinds of people, then I think that kind of message is one that is not off-putting, but it gives you another thing to sort of sell to this larger electorate.
And how do you think it'll impact, let's say, places like Nevada and Arizona that want a crackdown on the border, but they also want to protect, the undocumented?
One way to view this is, Latinos have many identities, and their pan-ethnic one, that is their sense of being Latino and what's most tied to immigration, is only one. They have their identities, their economic identities, their class identities. And this is sort of an elite level problem, right? This is how operatives within both parties like to carve up different segments of society. What Trump did accidentally is he decided, I'm gonna make my campaign America first. And it just so happens that some Latinos actually prioritize their American identity over their ethnic identity. So you can imagine how a message like that resonates. When you're thinking of yourself as an American, any non-American entity, whether it's outside of our borders or inside our borders, is a persona non grata, even if they look like you. And that's sort of what's happened.
All right, we're going to talk about that shift to the right and why it's happening when Decision 2024 Latino Voters comes right back. It's important to understand that now more than ever, the Latino vote is not a monolith. Vanya Patino explains.
From crosswalks to public transportation and the air we breathe, Chris Chavez says everything is political. He realized this early on, having grown up in Long Beach and looking to his community to shape his views.
You look at California, the biggest source of climate and health harming emissions in California is transportation.
Now working in environmental policy, he says Democrats' efforts on this issue is a top reason for his support towards the party, with the economy, public infrastructure, and preserving democracy also up there.
The Inflation Reduction Act and the amount of infrastructure support it had, it's very clear that this is a priority for the Democratic Party.
With Latino heritage, he says California's Prop 187 from 1994 that previously banned undocumented immigrants from using state services like healthcare and public education also solidified his party affiliation. He's even volunteering as a phone banker this election year.
Can we count on your vote?
Recent polls by the Pew Research Center shows Kamala Harris has a 57% support among Latino voters, while Donald Trump has 39% support with this group. And while Democrats still have a clear advantage, the party has lost some ground with Latino voters. That's according to Mark Hugo Lopez, Director of Race and Ethnicity Research at the Pew Research Center.
Interesting things about Latino voters is that they are now seen more as a swing vote than they have ever been, or at least I should say, than they have been in a long time.
He says women are also playing a part in this.
Notice that the share of Hispanic women supporting Trump is up from what it was back in 2016. So maybe only 20% or so back then supported Trump in the election then, but today 37% say they're going to vote for him. So there's been a shift.
Having voted for Joe Biden in 2020, but now firm on her support for Donald Trump, student at Cal State Long Beach, Andrea Gonzalez, is one of those Latinas ditching the Democratic Party for the Republican Party. She says it was her mother who first switched parties, and it wasn't until moving out that she began to agree with her.
Inflation is a big one. You know, people are seeing it when they're pumping gas, when they're buying groceries.
She's also for tighter border restrictions and wants to see tougher laws on crime, but says it's especially the conservative values she saw in the party that made her switch.
I think people forget that Hispanics are very traditional, and I think that's one of the reasons why I align myself with the Republican Party.
Still, Mark says voter turnout will be very important to see where support is going to fall for this voting bloc. While Chris reminds everyone of the importance of voting in all races.
Is making sure that we're not just both as Latinos, but also as voters, that we're really paying attention to the whole gamut of issues from the White House down to City Council and beyond.
Each voter hoping their preferred candidate takes the win this November.
We're again joined by our panel of experts. Why it's just an incremental shift to the right amongst Latino men predominantly, but why is it happening?
Well, I think it has to do with the issues of the day. We know that the economy is so important, and I think the Republican candidate, former President Trump, is perceived as being more effective on the economy. I think there's a lot that's driving support for Trump, not just among Latinos, but many voters who are concerned about the rate of inflation, the cost of housing, the cost of goods. I think we have to contextualize every election because Latinos don't vote the same way every election. Today, 2024, the economy is the number one issue. Presidential election 2020, it was COVID. So it really depends on what's happening in the country.
And something that you brought up, Christian, I want to ask you about up front is the impact of politics on the pulpit, especially the evangelical movement. The Latino evangelical is the fastest growing evangelical in the country, and it's shifting away from the Democratic Party to the right. Why?
In the last 40 years, both parties have increasingly polarized, but they've also become increasingly associated with a lot of social groups throughout the country. And it so happens that for Republicans, one of the things they've done since at least the late 70s is try to sort of give housing to the new right, which it consisted primarily of evangelical leaders and their flock. And so when something like your religious identity is so important to you on a weekly basis at least, you may not be able to articulate it, but you know that your religious denomination is bound up with a very specific party, and there are only two, which actually makes it pretty easy.
Do you think the Latino voter will decide this election?
Well, they've done it before. They decided the election statewide in Nevada and re-electing Senator Cortez Masto. They decided it in Arizona in terms of who's the governor today. So Latinos continue to make a difference and will continue to do so.
Yeah, and I think thinking about the U.S. House and control of Congress, I think Latino voters will be pivotal to determining control of Congress, and I actually think Latino voters will probably move the control of Congress to the Democrats.
Christian Gross, Professor Efraim Perez, and Arturo Vargas, muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much for weighing in on this really important election. Appreciate you.
Gracias a ti.
1 million Latino U.S. citizens turn 18 each year, becoming the nation's second largest group of eligible voters, just behind white voters. In fact, 1 in 5 of those 17 million Latino voters that are expected to cast their ballots in this year's election will be participating in the voting process for the very first time in their lives. So, will such a booming population and powerful economic force harness their power and let their voices be heard? That's up to both parties to reach an electorate that has felt neglected by both. We'll see what happens this November. I'm Giselle Fernandez. Thank you for joining us and watching Decision 2024, Latino Voters. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. For more stories in your communities, click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV for the latest information, balanced coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.